Hei aku huia kaimanua o te motu nau mai, piri mai ki tēnei puna kōrero, hei ruku I te mata hunahuna o ngā take hohonu o te wā. Welcome to Mata, brought to you by te Māngai Pāho and Irirangi Te Motu, New Zealand on air. Labour MP Willow-Jean Prime joins us to talk about education, bootcamps, Oranga Tamariki, and why she believes Shane Jones's Ngāpuhi plan is a non-starter. E te tuakana, tēnā koe. You have the education portfolio now. In your whakaaro, what are the biggest problem areas?
Of course, I have only recently picked up this portfolio. I think I've had it for about 4 months. And the issues that I'm hearing coming through, because I'm really interested in hearing from the sector, from our kaiako, from our whānau, definitely the number one issue has been learning support. One of the challenges, that schools have and raise with me. But I am also hearing concerns about the new curriculum, fears around standardised testing coming through. And so being new to this portfolio, still engaging with peak bodies and with the sector to hear what are the issues for them that are top of mind as I take on the portfolio to hold the Minister to account and this government to account, but also as we develop our policy moving forward.
In your view though, is there a need for a big structural change? Because if you look at the way that we measure reading, numeracy, math and science, it's the PISA scores alongside 64 other nations, and we've had a continual slide in the results of those since around 2012 was the last one I looked at. Minister Stanford has introduced the structured literacy, phonics, vocab, fluency and comprehension. Are you a fan of that approach, that the structural change that she's trying to achieve?
Certainly structured literacy is something that Labour is supportive of and actually was happening under Labour. Her focus on consistency right across the board worries me a bit in terms of, I actually think that's more compulsory than consistency, and those are some of the things that I'm hearing from the sector as I'm engaging with them. And when it comes to testing, I put out a PR when I saw that the Ministry of Education was procuring a new assessment tool internationally, because to me that sounds and feels like a return of national standards by stealth, and there definitely are concerns around that kind of standardised testing, the comparing of our tamariki to each other, and of course Labour were opposed to national standards when National first introduced them back in the about 2009-2010.
The former Education Minister is now the leader of the Labour Party, Chris Hipkins. He's a senior member. He was a senior member in Cabinet, and yet, we still had sliding scales in terms of our performance. What would you do differently to make some real change?
I think what I'm seeing and hearing is just how important it is that we work with the sector, that this be sector-led and led by the sector and academics, the experts on this, and not from politicians in Wellington. So we have to work with the sector, trust them, back them when it comes to things like curriculum and assessment.
To focus on literacy and numeracy, Minister Stanford shifted money away from Māori and Pacific initiatives like Te Ahu o Te Reo Māori. What do you think of that call?
Well, if we take the cutting of funding for Te Ahu o Te Reo as an example, where the Minister's explanation for that was that that money was going to be redirected into maths resources, for example, my argument is, why should it have to be one or the other? Why couldn't there still be support for all teachers to have access to professional learning development to improve their competency in Te Reo Māori? But what we see is taking from one and putting it into something different. Why can't we have both? Why is one more important than the other? Of course, I wasn't able to get to the bottom of that and the answers from the Minister on that.
So will you make a commitment to bring that back? Te Ahu o Te Reo
Well, Te Ahu o Te Reo was one of our initiatives, and of course it was part of our strategy to build to 1 million Te Reo speakers, but also it was professional learning development program specifically for teachers and in the teaching sector. So it's not a free te reo Māori course provided by any institution. And we were seeing some really good results from that, but of course so early on and cancelled by this government.
So you'll reinstate it?
Well, of course, I can't announce anything prior to the election in terms of what our policies are or what will, be in a budget. We have to go through a process for that, but it is something that I am supportive of. It was a Labour policy. It was devastating to see this government cut it. We've also heard from many in the sector that they are bitterly disappointed that this government cut Te Ahu o Te Reo funding.
Are you going to be a spokesperson who's going to be able to make decisions, or will you have to consult, your party leaders?
As a
spokesperson for education, for example.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm asking questions around Te Ahu o Te Reo Māori, which, some would say, well, that would be an easy solution, just to reinstate the policy because it was your policy in the first place. Will you be the kind of MP that will have to go back and consult with your leaders, or do you think you'll be able to be trusted to make the decisions or the announcements yourself?
Well, I don't think we make any of the decisions ourselves in isolation. Our job is to gather the evidence, the information, the support for something, and to work with our team to develop what our policies are going to be leading into the election, to develop budget bids. They're not something you just have the authority to make your own decision. Of course, all of these things went through a budget process and
I
through
guess
cabinet and so on.
The intention.
Certainly that is still our goal. One of the challenges that we're going to have when it is our turn to govern again is to see what the impact of this government's cuts on kaupapa Māori initiatives, on te reo initiatives has been, and where we are in terms of the strategy that we set. But our kaupapa is that we would love to see 1 million speakers of te reo Māori.
Just switching now to Kurapapa Mai, the Waitangi Tribunal last year, I think it was, made comment. I found the Crown had shut Kurapapa Mai out of the last big education reforms. How important is it to have kura at the table?
I think it's extremely important to have kura at the table, and I have met with kura kaupapa in the early stages of this portfolio, but there's so much more that we can kōrero about in terms of the kaupapa, the opportunities, the challenges. Of course, I heard some of the response to the budget, some of the criticisms of the budget, and so I'm here to listen to what kura kaupapa have got to say and to see what we can work on moving forward.
That recommendation from the Waitangi Tribunal covered the period when Labour was in power, so will kura get something different from you as a minister?
I am keen to work with kura kaupapa Māori on what it is that they want and need to be able to continue to build on the wonderful kaupapa that they have.
They want a separate education entity. Will you give them that?
I haven't had a kōrero with them about that, but I am keen to hear what it is that they are wanting to do and the support that they need, what is currently happening, how that is going. And, as Labour develops its policy, I am listening and engaging with the sector.
But given your experience with the reo, with kura up in the north, would it make sense though that Te Kura Kaupapa Māori, which is gold standard in terms of its results, would have its own entity, something like the Kohhangar Trust, so they can have rangatiratanga over their decision making and their pūtea?
So that's not something that I want to say for them. That's a kōrero.
Well, no, they've been asking for it for years.
Yeah, but myself, I haven't had the opportunity to engage with them about where exactly they're at, where they would like to go, and what shape or form that looks like for them. We have kura kaupapa, we have kohanga reo, we have ngā kura aiwi, and we have our tauira that are in auraki, and so keen to engage with all of those different parts of the education system.
Do you get this? Do you understand it though? That does it make sense to you that the 72 kura kaupapa who don't operate anything like mainstream would want to be in control, in charge of their own destinies? I
have read the report and have followed that journey and understand the challenges that they have had with the mainstream education system, the legislation as it has been in the past, and I am keen to continue to engage with them to look at what we can move forward with.
Charter schools, what's your plan for charter schools? Keep them, expand them, or scrap them?
Scrap them. Labor's policy is that we don't support charter schools. We have been really clear about that. We have said that we will not support charter schools if and when re-elected. That's something that we did, was our position previously. One of the things I have said though in my conversations with colleagues is when it comes to Māori looking at charter schools, I'm keen to understand why they look at that model versus what we have and what some of their issues and concerns might be with the current system and why that system becomes a more appealing option to them.
It's tēnō rangatiratanga, isn't it? Isn't that why they pick that model over the kura kaupapa, so they can have their own mana motuhaki over their funding and their decision making?
Possibly, but again that's something that I'm keen to engage with those who have pursued that pathway. It's interesting to me though that the funding model of it is fundamentally unfair. You know, it is almost 5 times what a mainstream state school is funded, and that is not appropriate. But I am interested to hear from those who look at that as an option, what their concerns about the other options available. I know back in 2016-17, when I was having this conversation, it was quite hard for a school to get approval to become a kura aiui, for example, our special character schools, but we have seen more of those in more recent times being approved. And so for those that want that option, it is being approved more now than it once was, and I know that for some a charter school was appealing because they couldn't get that special character status.
So if it's, as you say, 5 times more expensive and unfair, will you undo charter schools? Will you do away with them even if they exist today?
So Chris Hipkins has been clear that the Labour Party policy is we do not support charter schools.
So all those children in charter schools will be redirected to mainstream schools?
That's what happened under the last Labour government, because we do not support charter schools. It's an unfair model, and we also have other concerns with it as well.
The ministry once punished Tamariki for speaking te reo Māori. That damage is still being felt today. What role should the ministry play now in rebuilding the reo?
Well, I think the education system has a really important place in revitalising te reo Māori. We know that from Kohhangar Reo movement, for example, from the kura kaupapa movement, the importance that having te reo Māori in schools makes to the revitalisation of our language. We can see the success that we've had with that, but we want to continue to build on that. We know that when Labour was in government, we put significant funding into Māori education, into te reo, and I would like to see that to continue.
Is that te ahu o te reo perhaps?
That could be te ahu o te reo, but there were other kaupapa as well. You know, when I think about the investment that Calvin was able to secure for Kohhangar Reo, for increasing the pay of our kaiako and kaiawhina, but also, you know, in the facilities. So it's not just in professional learning development for our kaimahi, it's in all areas.
When we talk about the punishment for speaking te reo Māori, we're not talking about Kohhangar Reo and Kura, we're talking about the mainstream, the native schools of the day and the rest of it. Dover Samuels told the Waitangi Tribunal the ministry should apologise for the past. He tried with Calvin Davis at the time when he was minister, didn't get it over the line. Is that something you would make a commitment? E ora tonu ana a Dover, and he still feels it.
Yeah. Without knowing what Calvin's response to that was, I think we have seen in treaty settlements and acknowledgement of the impact that Crown breaches have had on te reo, as an example. I'm not sure whether that was suggested to be something as part of a Ngāpuhi settlement, but we also have the continuation of the kaupapa claims through the Waitangi Tribunal as well.
Well, maybe that's a good idea. Should it be part of an apology for a treaty settlement, particularly if in that rohe you have experienced lots of punishment for te reo Māori in our grandparents' generation, perhaps? Would you be open to something like that?
Without putting myself at the negotiation table, because obviously those are the sorts of things that claimants from the area that is in negotiations would be bringing forward what it is that they want to negotiate, including the historical accounts and the apology as well as the redress for that. So I would not want to suggest what that should be for Ngāpuhi, ngā hapu o Ngāpuhi.
Toko iti o rātau e oro tonu ana. Will you make a commitment to the handful left, like Dover Samuels, that there will be some kind of redress for the punishment he suffered when he was a small child?
Again, I think that is part of the treaty settlement process that I know Ngāpuhi are in the process of. That is something that those claimants may bring forward in that process and should be responded to accordingly by the Crown. But I don't want to jump ahead of their process really and say what I think should be negotiated and done as a result of that. That's the kōrero for them to have at the appropriate place and time.
Boot camps are back. You've opposed them. The ministry also failed kids in care. Tamariki Māori are still lagging behind in achievement, being excluded at higher rates and falling out of education earlier. No one has really been held accountable for that. Should the ministry take a harder look at itself?
Absolutely. The government should be taking a harder look at itself. When the national government campaigned on reinstating boot camps, the evidence shows us that boot camps don't work. The Prime Minister said he doesn't care whether it does or it doesn't work, they're going to do them. And I have been challenging this government to give us the details, give us the evidence around the pilot that they have been running in terms of whether they are working in reducing recidivism and reoffending, and they refuse to give us that information. They refuse to listen to the evidence and the experts, and we have had people before our select committee in tears because this legislation is going through the House, in tears because this is to them history repeating itself, not learning the lessons from the past.
Is the Minister, Karen Shaw, she's simply not listening to the survivors?
The government, including the Minister, are not listening to survivors, they're not listening to experts who all oppose boot camps, saying that that approach does not work and that that money would be better invested in other programs and interventions.
You were youth minister at one stage, so you do know the issues around youth crime. If not boot camps, then what?
Well, it's really interesting to see that this government has actually continued Labour's circuit breaker, they call it fast track, investing about $30 million into that and the expansion of that program. And that is because that program works and it is reducing reoffending. The success rates of that are much higher, I believe, than what we are seeing with the boot camp pilot. And so that is the type of initiative that I think this government should be investing. That $30 million for boot camps should be going into more programs like Circuit Breaker, Fast Track, Kotahi Te Whakaaro, and so on.
RAM rates have reduced by about 60%. Is the government getting something right there?
Well, I would think if you look at what is contributing to the reduction in RAM raids, because that was a trend where it was coming down under Labour. If you see the statistics over time, it was trending down. And so it's programs like Circuit Breaker, which they have continued, that I believe are contributing to that reduction in RAM raids. And that's what we all wanted to see and why that investment in those sorts of programs was so important. They cannot say that it has been as a result of their boot camps, because that pilot is almost near completion and only has 9 participants. So what has been contributing to that? They have no other law and order policies directly aimed at rangatahi and youth. It is the Labour policy that they have continued that I believe is significantly contributing to that reduction that we are seeing.
So you were youth minister, you were also a lawyer before you became a politician. You understand the justice system and the cycles in it. One of the other initiatives that was scrapped under this coalition was Section 27 pre-sentencing reports. Would you bring those back?
Yeah, really, we fought that one hard in the House because, again, they are ignoring evidence. It's just political ideology that's driving this. To them, it was anything that mentions Māori or Te Tiriti or Waitangi, has no place in the system. And we fiercely opposed them removing that and then putting in things like 3 strikes, for example, which have no evidence that those sorts of things even work. Again, I'm not the justice spokesperson, that is Duncan Webb, who is responsible for developing our justice policies.
Bootcamps are part of a Get Tough approach after everything we've heard from survivors of state institutions and the Royal Commission of Inquiry. Do you trust kids in care are safe today?
Kids in care are not safe today, and recent reports prove that. I think in the last year, over 500 tamariki had been harmed in the care of Oranga Tamariki. And so we know that the system is still not safe, that these issues that were raised in the Royal Commission are not historical issues. They are still issues that our tamariki are experiencing today. And so it concerns me when this government is cutting over 400 jobs at Oranga Tamariki and tens of millions of dollars to community providers for the work that they do with whānau to ensure that our tamariki are safe from harm. So I think this government has got its priorities wrong, and that the actions that they are doing are not going to reduce that harm. I worry that it's going to increase. And in fact, last week, I think it was, very quietly, Oranga Tamariki had a report uploaded onto its page saying that it fears there's a very high risk that it's not going to meet its own targets in responding to reports of concern, of which we've had over a third increase in reports of concern. What that means is more children are going to be harmed more. And this is the job of Oranga Tamariki, but they are being asked to do this with less resources, less human resource capacity, and less funding to their partners, community providers.
Is OT fit for purpose?
The report after report would tell you that Oranga Tamariki is not fit for purpose, that there is still so much more that is needed to happen in order to address the systemic issues that we are seeing coming through these reports. Many of the reports call for an increased devolution to community, including the Royal Commission, who said more in-community supports and services. The Minister says that she is supportive of that. I want to actually see that. I actually want to see how that is happening. When I know that there are Māori providers, for example, who are calling for devolution, and we've had the removal of Section 7AA. They have faced funding cuts from this government's cost savings exercise. I want to see the evidence that that is what the organisation is committed to doing.
Would you bring back Section 7AA?
We have spoken about this previously, and one of the great things about the submission process was to hear from so many submitters about how important Section 7AA was for them, why they think it's important, why they think it made a difference. I also think there is an opportunity to look at how it could perhaps be improved and strengthened. It is one important mechanism that was in the legislation. It was still quite early in its time in the legislation. It hadn't yet had its review. I think that it would have been good to have a review done of it to see if it was fit for purpose, if the section was doing what everybody hoped it would, and whether it needed to be improved or not. And I'm keen to have that conversation with stakeholders about Section 7AA.
You're from Te Tai Tokerau. What do you make of what the government's saying about the Ngāpuhi settlement? They prefer one commercial model. That's what was said the other day, despite Ngāpuhi, having done decades now of trying to find a model that fits?
Well, I think that what is really important is that the government shouldn't be dictating to Ngāpuhi what should happen in terms of settlement. And that's what we are seeing and hearing from the government, from Minister Jones, for example. In my view, waiho mā ngā hapu anō ngā hapu e kōrero.
What do you make of Shane Jones, who is from the north, who's had a lot of experience around the Ngāpuhi claim, working, in government, on the other side of government with hapu and iwi? What do you make of his position? A private member's bill, is that fair?
Oh, it's absolutely not fair. It's not the treaty settlement process that we have all been used to and working with. And to simply announce a private member's bill saying how it would settle Ngāpuhi's claims is wrong. That's the wrong approach. That doesn't honour the treaty settlement process at all. And it overrides the voice of ngā hapu. And as I said before, waiho mā ngā hapu e kōrero.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora.
Tēnā i te whakarongo tātou kia Willow-Jean Prime, me maparimata mo te rōpū reipa. E mihi whakamāno atu nei ki te Māngai Pāho me irirangi te motu. Nā rāua tēnei hōtaka i tautoko. We'll be back with more mata in a fortnight. Mahoro mai.